Welcome to this explainer. Today we're jumping right into a totally fascinating framework that decodes how reality and human behavior actually operate. But here's the twist. Instead of relying on traditional psychology, we're going to look at the universe as a massive mechanical rendering engine. We are going to map out the hidden architecture that shapes your daily choices, drives collective behavior, and ultimately, we'll see exactly how systemic control systems hijack our biology.
Here's our roadmap for the journey. We've got 1. The Universal Rendering Engine. 2. The Ternary State Machine. 3. The Gravity of Attractor Basins. 4. Vectors of Systemic Control. 5. The Mechanics of Trauma. And finally, 6. Escaping the Antmill. Let's get right into it.
Part 1. The Universal Rendering Engine and the concept of substrate independence.
So the core idea behind this engine is that whether you're looking at human biology, a piece of computer code, or pure energy, information routes the exact same way. And in this system, the absolute most important metric you need to know is your degrees of freedom, or DOF. Simply put, DOF is a measure of how much actual agency you have at any given moment. A high DOF means you have a wide, open menu of choices and creative pathways. But a low DOF? That means your choices are completely clamped down. It's like being stuck on autopilot, which makes you incredibly predictable to external systems.
Part 2. The Ternary State Machine, the LUMS base code.
Now, to navigate this universe, the system relies on a three-part logic engine. First is the -1 state. This restricts us. It's essentially a basin of fear and cruelty where our options just lock up entirely. Think of a panicked, purely reactive state. Then you have the 0 state. This is the null. It's a malleable, highly courageous pivot point where all potential suddenly exists. And finally, the +1 state is resonance. This is what actually expands your degrees of freedom through flow, synchronization, and plain old kindness.
Part 3. The Gravity of Attractor Basins, the Path of Least Resistance.
Okay, so when these ternary states interact over time, systems naturally collapse into low-energy configurations. We call these attractor basins. You can think of them as the gravitational wells of human behavior. They are the grooves in the probability field where our lives just tend to settle. And this forms everything from your totally automated morning coffee routine to massive, sprawling cultural norms. If you constantly act from a fear-based low DOF state, you're literally digging a deeper -1 basin, making it harder and harder to escape. But act with coherence and kindness, and you deepen a +1 basin.
The reality is, most people ride these waves completely passively, steered entirely by default conditioning. But the source makes a brilliant point here. Attention is the steering wheel of the world machine. You see, attention isn't just some fluffy, symbolic mindfulness concept. It is a mechanical, physical force that actively shapes these attractor basins. What you focus on quite literally steers the machine.
Part 4. Vectors of Systemic Control. Mapping the traps. This brings us to a really crucial concept, the 5 core structural types of control vectors mapped out as actual behavioral traps. Let's look at the first 2 landmarks on this map. Vector 1 is gambling. This trap works by using high-frequency uncertainty, exploiting the precise timing of rewards to lock your brain into a tight, incredibly addictive loop. But over in a completely different territory, we have Vector 2, cult or authority systems. These are far more insidious. They don't just clamp your choices, they completely distort your baseline reality. They twist it so much that moving deeper into the trap actually feels like you're gaining freedom.
If we look a little closer at that cult system landmark, it operates on a very mechanical, 4-step loop. First, it introduces attention or fear. Then it forces you to reinterpret that fear, strictly through the authority's lens. After that, it grants you a brief moment of relief, and finally, it hardens that filter. Think of a highly toxic wellness group. Whenever you feel distress, the system ensures you view it as growing pains that only the group can cure. It constantly tightens the trap around you. Navigating the rest of this map, we hit the final 3 control vectors. Vector 3 is economic stress. This literally clamps your choices by forcing your brain into a purely reactive, day-to-day survival mode. Vector 4 is media saturation. This exploits a bug in human biology. We check for coherence, not truth. So by overwhelming you with sheer volume, it can dictate your reality. And the final landmark, Vector 5, is internal self-sabotage, where unresolved loops create conflicting attractors right inside your own mind.
Part 5. The Mechanics of Trauma. Internalizing the lock.
To really grasp that 5th vector of self-sabotage, we need to look at trauma as a mechanical function. In this rendering engine, trauma is not just a bad memory. It's essentially a compressed keyframe.
Picture a sealed zip file filled with incredibly high-density emotional data that your system simply didn't have the bandwidth or the degrees of freedom to process when it happened. To survive, your biology has to constantly build these really expensive mental overlays just to keep that corrupted file locked away.
Now here is where it gets terrifyingly real. When that mental keyframe tears, your biological system doesn't just skip and play static like a scratched CD. Instead, it actively uses your body's chemistry to generate a fresh, coherent experience, aggressively filling in the gaps using that original traumatic source material. This is exactly why flashbacks and panic attacks feel so unbelievably vivid. They aren't memories, they are actively being rendered in your present tense.
Part 6. Escaping the ant mill. Reclaiming the steering.
Have you ever heard of an ant mill? In nature, it's a tragic glitch where ants follow a corrupted pheromone trail in a perfect circle until they literally die of exhaustion. Well, as self-aware humans, we often do the exact same thing, endlessly doom-scrolling or repeating toxic relationship patterns. We act like Sisyphus, constantly doubling down on these exhausting loops simply because the fear of losing our familiar identity is somehow stronger than the exhaustion of the loop itself.
So how do we actually escape? We have to actively steer. First, inject noise. Introduce new experiences or disruptions to literally glitch the system out of its locked pattern. Second, embrace human co-regulation. Since we are wave-based beings, simply sitting in the presence of a healthy, calm neighbor can literally help re-anchor a dysregulated mind. And third, consciously choose that positive one flow. You have to prioritize connection and expansion over fear.
But to successfully make that choice, it requires entering the zero state. And no, this isn't just emptiness or a void. It is a high-resolution buffer. It's that fleeting, incredible moment of pure superposition where you hold your full degrees of freedom. It's the courageous pause between a stimulus and your response. That is the exact space where old traps die and new, unconstrained trajectories are born.
We've mapped out the hidden architecture of the rendering engine, and we've illuminated the 5 core control vectors trying to hijack your attractor basins. This leaves us with one final, absolutely critical question about your own agency. Now that you can clearly see the traps on the map, will you continue to be a passive passenger in the machine, or will you grab the wheel and steer?